greetings to all the panelists and the discussants. I've been told that I have between 8 to 10 minutes to go over several key critical issues. So I will just dive into this and not lose time. Uh, as an Afghan who has been following events in my country for more than 4 decades, what happened obviously this year was shocking, but also something that personally I foresaw coming, not the way it happened, but as an alternative to a peace settlement. It is unfortunate that we were not able to reach a peace and a political settlement in Doha, but I will get to that later. Let me just go quickly over a few reasons why I think we had a debacle in Afghanistan and a regime collapse in Kabul, and an American withdrawal the way it happened, and as well as NATO withdrawal. I think that looking back at the last 20 years, obviously the last 20 years are very much connected to the previous 20 years of Afghanistan, or 22 years of Afghanistan's history, starting with the communist coup in 1978 and the Soviet invasion in December of 27 this week, 42 years ago. The post 9/11 intervention, obviously, had its own logic. Could there have been other ways of handling it? Yes, but that decision was taken to rebuild Afghanistan after having failed to do so after the Soviets left. But unfortunately, looking back, I would say that we failed to have strategic vision and consistency from the internationals as well as Afghan leaders. We also had weak Afghan ownership beyond what the upper elites were providing. And we were not able over 20 years to increase the level of self-reliance and, for example, replace the 80% dependency that the Afghan government had on foreign donations and the support of the budget. Peace and reconciliation, which should have been a key issue from the very beginning, became slogans, unfortunately, and a pretext for maintaining a status quo, a military status quo. And so many opportunities were missed from 2002 until 2018, when the Americans started to get more serious about peace talks, and we know what happened in that interval. I was a witness to the fact that state building and nation building, two key components of a recovery, lacked a foundation that involved the Afghan people themselves. And so there was no strategic pathway in that regard. Reconstruction and development priorities were intertwined with contracting and multiple donors with their own agendas, and a Afghan government or Afghan entity as recipient lacking accountability, which unfortunately fueled corruption at the highest levels. Even today, there was news that an anti-corruption organization named Ashraf Ghani as one of the top 5 most corrupt individuals in the world, something that should have been done years ago. The military mission superseded other missions, the mission of rebuilding in Afghanistan, and it became the main driver of the international presence. That should have been the opposite, where the military mission over time should have been reduced. It was, but the combat mission ended in 2014, but then the American and NATO military operations in support of the Ghani government continued almost till the last week before the fall of Kabul. The other thing that I think caused this collapse was the fact that the Afghan population, the Afghan people, over time, instead of the terrorist organizations, instead of those who were seen as spoilers or a threat, a real threat to security, the Afghan population became a target and a victim of the ongoing war. And as a result, the so-called Hearts and Minds campaign failed miserably, actually, and more and more communities across Afghanistan, not just in the Pashtun tribal belts, but across Afghanistan, um, turned against the mission and against the government that they saw as being very corrupt at the same time. And they started losing faith in the nascent young democracy, especially the majority, 70% of the young Afghans who had an opportunity to have an education, unfortunately lost faith in democracy because they saw huge discrepancies and elections that were highly fraudulent and undermined the people's will. So that became a problem. So we have a lot of other reasons, and I'm not going to go into that. I'll quickly jump into what is the situation now and what should be done. There are three main players. Obviously, there's the Afghan entity, the Afghan players, and the Taliban right now are in control, full control of the country, and they are the key player. As much as others would want to also be engaged, but the Taliban are very slow in engaging other Afghan players at the moment. So for the Taliban, I think that they need to adhere to some of the key pledges that they had made in Doha before the fall of Kabul, especially in regards to pursuing a political settlement path, leading to a more legitimate order in Afghanistan that is not only broad-based, but also reflective of the complex Afghan society and political constituencies. They also need to resolve what seems to be some of their own internal debates and some differences of opinion that have emerged over time, even though they're very good at masking them, on key issues that are preventing stronger cohesion and inclusivity, as well as raising questions in the international community, especially, as well as amongst the Afghan population, about their convictions and their commitment to human rights values, even if given an Islamic framework, and to women's rights and minority rights, especially when it comes to access to education and employment. So all of these issues, whether they are from a international law perspective or Islamic law perspective, are not very clear yet as far as the Taliban are concerned. Um, I think that what is also important for the Taliban to realize is that they need to engage other Afghan players in order to prevent Afghanistan from becoming an international ward and a UN NGO run, de facto managed and run entity. Afghanistan is a country that needs to have a sovereign government, a representative government to the extent possible, where the Taliban and others can agree on power sharing or any type of political order that can have a majority support. Let me jump to the region quickly. The region is extremely important. Six important neighbors of Afghanistan and other stakeholders beyond. But very quickly, I think I want to say that it has become obvious that in the region and in the neighborhood of Afghanistan, almost everyone wants stability. They're very fearful of instability in Afghanistan and understand what the consequences and ramification could be. Um, and I think that there's a need for threat mitigation, threats such as different forms of terrorism to different countries surrounding Afghanistan, threats from the drug and narcotics business, and criminality, as well as the threat of millions of Afghans continuing to leave the country in a mass exodus that could in itself create a lot of issues regionally and beyond. Um, so I think that working on a counterterrorism coordinated strategy and counter narcotic strategy at the regional level is going to be very important, both for the Taliban in order for them to assure others of their credentials, as well as in return for the regional players to make sure that they can help in the Taliban achieve those goals. There's also a vital need to reactivate and revive the Afghan economy. This economy now has tanked. It has collapsed. It has given way to more than 25 million Afghans facing starvation. An economy that was very much dependent on international aid is now very much still in need of international aid on the humanitarian side. Everything else has stopped. There's no more funding streams for anything that has to do with reconstruction or other projects in Afghanistan. Which brings us to the third element before I stop, that has to do with the key donors and key international organizations and key NGOs, and obviously those who over the last 20 years have played a critical role in funding Afghanistan's re-emergence and revival and reconstruction. They were the main funding providers till August 15th. Since then, they stopped all operations except for the focus on humanitarian assistance to make sure that the Afghans do not die of starvation at this point. We need more engagement in this regard between the Taliban and other players. There is a loss of trust. We need trust building, and we need a new paradigm. There's obviously a consensus still holding that they will not recognize officially the Taliban government. That also passes through the United Nations Security Council and the P5. I'm not sure exactly how long the P5 is going to hold on this, whether China or Russia or both of them may use their veto power. But obviously, it's a very complex situation from a geopolitical perspective, and the fact that the Taliban are still on the sanctions list and they're blacklisted in different ways. But what has happened in Afghanistan to the Afghan people is man-made. It is also very political. If the Taliban decide to solve some of the issues that have to do with governance and broad-based government, as well as try to address the issues of human rights and gender rights and minorities and others, and also be helpful to others in the fight against terrorism, then obviously the political issue should and would be resolved for most of the international players. And then that should open the path for recognition. But we are not there yet. We are not sure if that is going to change anytime soon. My thought is that there's a 6-month window open right now for the Taliban to show some flexibility, and for the international community as well to show some openness and engagement and moving towards something more normal. I will stop here since there's a lot more to talk about, and hopefully address some of the questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador.